My name is Gergana, for those of you who weren't here last week. I usually go by Jerry, because that's a little bit easier to pronounce. And I work here at BBD with a lot of these other lovely ladies who are here to help you learn some JavaScript today. So last week's workshop, for those of you who weren't here, was on HTML and CSS. And we were trending on Twitter. So let's do that again this week, okay? So send out your tweets so we can trend again. Okay, so who here has done JavaScript before? All right, we have a few people. That's good, that's good. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you a little bit about JavaScript and what JavaScript is and what JavaScript does. And then we're going to do an exercise using Angular. Why Angular? Well, Angular is what I do. I know Angular very well, and therefore I can teach it. So that's why we're going to use Angular. Angular has a lot of benefits. It's a JavaScript framework for creating front ends, so for creating websites. But we'll go into that just now. Okay, so that's the tags and the everything. So JavaScript has been around for a very long time. It is the language of the web. Mostly it's used for creating websites, and the reason JavaScript is the way it is because it has been used for making websites for so long. It's been around for, I think, about 20 years now. Who knows why JavaScript is called JavaScript? Anyone? Take a guess. Anyone?
Scripting language based on Java?
No. That's what they wanted people to think. So the answer at the front here was scripting language based on Java. But actually, when JavaScript came about, Java was one of the most popular languages. And in order to increase its popularity, they named it JavaScript, just so they can ride on the bandwagon of the popularity of Java itself, which is quite interesting. And who knows what big corporate owns the trademark JavaScript? Anyone want to guess? No one? Oracle. Because it starts with Java, the name JavaScript is owned by Oracle. So technically the JavaScript we write today is not JavaScript. JavaScript is just a more commonly known name. It's actually ECMA script. ECMA script or ECMAScript or ES, as it's more commonly known, is what JavaScript actually is. And ECMAScript gets updated and new things get introduced into JavaScript quite often. Every year there's more and more features being introduced into JavaScript. But those of you who were here last week might remember I said, what is the main rule of the web? Don't break the web. So even though you can change JavaScript and you can adapt JavaScript and you can add things to JavaScript, you can never remove the things that are already in JavaScript, because that would mean you would break the web. Why I like being a web developer. This is the GoCode website. You've probably all seen it. Let me show you some cool stuff you can do when you know a little bit of web. I just want to put this over here. So we can check quickly, is the GoCode website mobile friendly? Ah, it is, you see. Well done. Cool. What else can we do? We can do things like changes are permanent, but when you know the web, you can do things like this. You can play around with other people's websites. You can check if other people's websites, when I was doing a demo like this previously, I opened up the website and there was a bunch of errors on that website. And you can say to people, look, your page has errors. Things like this are pretty cool with the web. You can do a lot of stuff. And when you refresh, if our internet works, it goes back to normal. None of it is permanent. So you won't ever break anyone's website doing little things like this. Okay.
Will it only display for you?
Yeah. So I'm just changing it temporarily in my browser. And there's a really cool quote from this guy called Jeff Atwood, which says, any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. Because there is no other language that can run in a website, can run on a server, can run on a robot, can run on pretty much any computer you can think of. JavaScript is the way of the future. And now we get to Angular. So Angular is one of the very popular web frameworks you can use. So who here's heard of Angular? Okay, a few people. All right. Other frameworks like Angular, we have React, we have Vue, we have Ember, we have Knockout. There's a lot of them. And there's also a lot of religious arguments about which one you should be using. But for different reasons, you have different frameworks. So the answer usually when you're asked which framework should we use is it depends. What do you want to do? Angular is a great framework for building large applications. But because of that, it's not very fast. While React is a great framework for fast interactions with the website. So they all have their purposes. And you have to know a little bit about each of them in order to be able to answer the question, which framework should we use? But I really like Angular. I started out in Angular, so I know a lot about it. I've learned a lot about it over the years. I started out in AngularJS in about 2013. It was originally released in 2010. And when it was released, it was the most popular framework out there. Everyone was using Angular. Everyone was wanting to move to Angular. And it was the next best thing since sliced bread. And then 4 years later, they announced Angular 2. And everyone was excited because there were a few issues with Angular. You know, we wanted to fix it, so Angular 2 would be even better. But Angular 2 had pretty much nothing to do with Angular 1. There was no upgrade path from 1 to 2, so you couldn't upgrade your website. You would have to rewrite the entire thing. So that was the first statement they released in 2014. And most people who supported Angular for a very long time felt like this. But then, when it was officially released in September of 2016, there was an upgrade path. The upgrade path was there. It wasn't a very easy upgrade path, but you could do it. You could slowly change your application from 1 to 2. And then a few months later, after they released it, 2 months later, they announced Angular 4. And the whole world went, what the hell is going on here? Firstly, what happened to 3? And then we just started upgrading from 1 to 2. How are we now going to do this from 2 to 4? But Firstly, what happened to 3? So there was a thing where they decided the whole Angular team together would release versions all at the same time. So the whole team would release Angular 3 together. But one part of the team, the Angular router, which is something we're going to use a little bit later, didn't get this memo. So they released Angular router version 3. So when they all wanted to go together, they were like, no, but we can't all go to 3 and they go to 4. That would make sense. Now, I know you're probably thinking, and as you should be, this is going to happen again in the future. Probably will. And then the reason that it was going to 4 is because they decided to use proper versioning standards. So versioning of Angular 1 was very weird. They would just up the numbers behind the 1. So it would be like 1.1, then it would be 1.2, and then 1.2.1. The numbers didn't make sense when they were releasing them. So there's now a standard that they follow, which is also the NPM standard. It's called semantic versioning. And it means that all of the numbers will get increased in this way. Major, then minor, then patch. And what that means is a major release is we broke it on purpose. So they introduced breaking changes into the framework, and there is a very big chance you have to fix things when you upgrade. So that was the 4 release. So then the minor one is we broke it accidentally. So they introduced some minor changes, and they probably won't break your code. But they had to put them in, otherwise there would be little things still broken in the framework. And then the patch is the last one, which is they fixed the little bug in the framework and they pushed it out. So they're probably going to break your workaround for it. And then because we now were on 4, and actually at the moment we are on 5, which was released in November or December last year, and 6 is coming soon. They needed to change the way that they named Angular. They couldn't call it Angular 1 and 2 anymore because we're on 5. So they decided that everything that was version 1 would be called AngularJS, and everything from Angular 2 onwards would be called Angular. And this is what we now know as Angular. But before we get started with our Angular code, let me show you some of the cool things that JavaScript can do. And one of the reasons why a lot of people really dislike JavaScript. So there's one thing in JavaScript that's quite important, and that is the difference between a double equals and a triple equals. Okay, so those of you who've done some programming probably know the difference between a single and a double equals, right? So single equals is assigning a variable, and double equals is a comparison of two things. But now in JavaScript we have a triple equals. Who can tell me what the difference with a triple equals is? Nobody? All right, okay. So JavaScript is not a statically typed language. Who knows what that means? Another prize. What is a statically typed language? Almost. You can have a prize in it. Okay, so statically typed languages are like C# and Java and C++, where you define the types for your variables. So when you say that A is equal to 10, A is an integer. In JavaScript, that's not the case. I could say var A is equal to 10, and then A would be 10. In a statically typed language, now A is an integer, and I wouldn't be able to assign it to something else. But in JavaScript, I could say A is now equal to hello, and A is now hello. So JavaScript is a dynamic language. You can change things like this So that is one of the weird things about JavaScript. And then we get a few other weird things. With the double and triple equals, you can now compare things like A. Okay, let's set A back to 10, sorry. So our A is 10. A double equals 10 will be true, right?
Yeah.
A double equals 10, true or false? It should be false, right? But it's true. So that is the difference between double and triple equals. So with double equals, you're only comparing the actual value, not the type. And triple equals, A triple equals 10 is false. So that's one of the catch things in JavaScript where you can get stuck and not realize why something is returning true when it shouldn't be. Then there's a few other weird things.
Sorry, Jerry, so what is the triple equals for?
So triple equals compares the value and the type, while double equals only the value. There's a few other weird things, like what's 1 plus 1? 2. What's 1.101 plus 1.02? 1.0, 2.033, 0.0002. Why? No one knows why. It was a mistake they made a very long time ago when creating JavaScript, and they can't fix it because it means that it will break the web. And a few other things. So an object in JavaScript is demarcated with, let me clear this so you can see at the top, with curly brackets like this. So this is an object. This is an empty object. It doesn't have anything in it. An array is square brackets. So this is an empty array. What happens if we add two objects together? We get the string object, object. Why? No one knows. What about if we add two arrays together? You'd think like an array is also an object, right? So we should probably get the same thing. Empty string. Why?
No one knows.
What about if we add an array to an object? But now, in normal, like the real world, in maths, so when you add 1 and 2, you get 3. If you add 2 and 1, you also get 3, right? So technically, if we swap this around, we should still get the same thing, right? So JavaScript is weird. It's very weird. But these are the kinds of idiosyncrasies in JavaScript that you have to get used to. And you have to know about them in order to program in JavaScript. And you will create workarounds for these weird idiosyncrasies. But you do get used to some of them eventually. Every now and then you'll get some weird one somewhere, and you'll be like, oh, this happens too? So you just got to be careful. And then we come to TypeScript. So Angular from 2 onwards uses TypeScript. Anyone know what TypeScript is? So we were talking about type-safe languages earlier. TypeScript is type-safe JavaScript. So statically typed JavaScript. And TypeScript isn't actually a language by itself that runs in the browser. TypeScript compiles into JavaScript, and that still runs in the browser. So all of that type safety that we're going to be adding to our Angular code, when it actually converts to JavaScript, none of those typings are actually there. what it gives you is it gives you a way to make sure that your entire team is sticking to some sort of standard way of writing code. Because JavaScript has so many weird things in it, it's difficult to work in a big team where people have different levels of experience in JavaScript, because it makes your code quite messy. While with TypeScript, it allows you to set certain standards and certain best practices and follow those standards and best practices to make sure your code looks nicer. Because one of the very important things about writing code is you have to be able to open that code 3 years from now and still understand what you wrote. And you have to always think about the person who will be maintaining your code, because you might be that person. And in 3 years' time, when you open your code and you think, oh crap, I need to rewrite this whole thing, that's a bad sign. All right, so that's why Angular decided to use TypeScript instead. TypeScript was created by Microsoft originally, and it also adds a few extra things besides type safety. It adds a few things that we're going to be using that help us with our Angular code, help us identify certain parts of the code, help us separate it nicely. But you'll see that when we start writing the code. Okay. So, a few of you were asking earlier if you can use Sublime, or I thought it would be easier to use something called StackBlitz. StackBlitz is a really cool little tool, and it's what we're going to use today. So the URL is the second one over here, stackblitz.com. StackBlitz is like an IDE in your browser. So you can write the code and see it live, see it compiling, see it doing things. So it just means you won't have to install too many things on your computers, and we sometimes struggle with the installations because it doesn't work on some people's computer. This, all you need is pretty much the internet, and you can write something. The only problem with this is that you can't actually then save your work at the end of the day. But we're also going to be going through the official Angular tutorial. So that's that URL at the top there. And we're going to build the app that's in that Angular tutorial. So I'm going to code and explain things, and I want you to try and follow. All right. If you get really stuck, I'm going to show you on the Angular tutorial site. At the end of each section, not that section because it doesn't have any code in it, but at the end of each section is all of the code we wrote for that section. All right, so if you miss a part, you can just go, when we get to the end of that section, copy that into your solution so that you can carry on with the next section. If I'm going too fast, please let me know. We don't have to finish this entire tutorial today. Okay, if we don't finish it, you can try it at home afterwards. And you can also download the entire example from the link. So if you want to have a look at it when you get home. All right. So when we get onto StackBlitz, you can see you can make 3 types of apps on StackBlitz. We're going to be making an Angular TypeScript app. So you can hit that. And that will immediately create our Hello Angular 5. So we'll be using Angular 5, which has quite a lot of cool features for compiling faster and generally just performance enhancements and things like that. If you were doing this on your local machine, you would use something called the Angular CLI. Who knows what CLI stands for? Command line interface. Yes. Can get a prize. Cool. So the Angular CLI creates a project very similar to this one that got created for us over here. It's a starter project, so you can use that to make your Angular project. All right. So what we're going to be building is something called Tour of Heroes. So this was created by a guy who works at Google, and it's a general short tutorial to teach you the basics of Angular so you can take that forward and use it in the future. Okay, so what we'll be building is something that looks a little bit like this. It's a little dashboard with your heroes, and when you click on a hero, you'll be able to see the details, and you would also have a list of all of your heroes with their IDs and everything. And at the bottom here, there's actually a little GIF you can see of the clicks. So we're going to build this little dashboard of heroes. So this is the instructions on how to install the Angular CLI, and this is the part we're not going to do. But we're going to start over here at Angular components. So a component in Angular is the basic building block of an Angular application. So we're going to create quite a few components and put them on our web page. The purpose of components is for code reusability, so that you can reuse things in different places and put pieces of code and HTML in different parts of your website. So a component, as its name suggests, is one little part of your entire website. So if we have a look at our application over here, I'm just going to close this for now so you can see. On the side here is all of our files. So we have a styles.css. This is where we're going to be putting all of our global stylings. So over here we have our files on the side. We have our styles, our polyfills. So what a polyfill is not all browsers can understand all JavaScript. So all the browsers might not understand certain new features that have been included into JavaScript. So especially IE, which we hopefully don't use anymore, Edge. If you have to use it in Windows 1, use Edge. But polyfills add little filler functions to enable certain features that don't work in all the browsers to work in them. So you don't have to worry about this polyfills file. It creates a TypeScript one for you. So the .ts, that means it's a TypeScript file. Okay. Our main.ts is where our application starts. So this is what starts up our application. It comes into here and looks what we want to do when we first go to this web page. That's what the bootstrap module means. Okay, and we're passing it an app module, which we're going to have a look at now. Then we have our index.html, and our index.html just has this loading. So what that means is, while our application is still figuring out what to display to us, it's just going to show this little loading. As soon as it's figured it out, it's going to replace everything on this page with whatever we've set as my app. And I'll show you where we set that my app now. Then this over here is just a configuration file for telling it things like where to find the styling, where to find external libraries. So the only thing we have in ours is the styles. In this app folder is where all of the important things happen. First important thing is this app module. We're going to make quite a few changes in the app module, but we have things where we import, for example, the browser module. That means this app is going to be running in a browser. The forms module for creating interactive forms. We're going to be creating some forms a little bit later. And then we have declarations. The declarations is where we define our components. So this app has two components at the moment, app component and hello component. And then the last thing we specify is which is the first component to load when we land on this page. Okay, that's the app component. And here is our app component's TypeScript. And that my app that we saw in the HTML, there it is. So that means that everything, once we're done loading, everything that's in my app will get replaced by whatever this says over here. Okay. And on our component, we also define the HTML and the CSS related to this component. You can see that the actual style URLs are in an array, the square brackets, which means you can specify multiple styles if you wanted to. So let's have a look what's inside the app component. In the styles, we're just setting the font family. Okay? And in the HTML, we have this thing over here. Hello name. Double curly brackets is a way for displaying a string that you've set in your TypeScript on your HTML. Okay, so over here in our TypeScript, we have this name set to Angular 5. And in our HTML, we have double curly brackets. Okay, and when we go to our preview, we can see it says hello Angular 5. So let's change that. Let's change it in our TypeScript to say it automatically reloads for us, and there we go, it's changed. Okay. And then the last thing here is the hello component. We're going to, for now, delete this hello component because we're going to follow the tutorial. So you can right click on it and say delete. And then you'd have to come into the HTML over here and just delete this as well. Otherwise it will break. If you open app module, you'll see hello component is now underlined in red. So we need to delete this line, app.module.ts, and that hello component. So now we're going to move on to step 3. In step 3, you'll see there's a few instructions that speak about the Angular CLI. But remember, we're not using the CLI, so we're going to have to do things a little bit differently. Okay? But what we're going to do now is create a new component. And that component, for now, is just going to display our hero. One hero. Okay? To do that, in our staplets, inside the app folder, we're going to right click on the app folder and say new folder. In this folder, we're going to call hero, because it's going to be our hero component. Okay. Then in our hero folder, we're going to add 3 files. We're going to add a hero component TS, a hero component HTML, and a hero component CSS. Right. So inside app, we right-click on app and say add new folder and call it hero, right? Then we right-click on hero and we say new file. And the first file is hero.component dot new folder first. Hero folder, and inside the hero folder, yeah, .ts. So hero.component.ts. Now, this naming convention is just a convention. You don't have to name your components like this. But we name them like this so we can find them easier, so we can remember where they are easier, so we can reference them to each other easier. Okay? So we have our folder with hero.component.ts. Then we're going to add another file inside hero called hero.component.html. And then a third file inside the hero folder called hero.component.css. So the selectors we were talking about. Stack Blitz is a little bit, hasn't been updated since Angular 5 was released. So it uses Angular 5, but not all of its standards have been updated. So you know the selector in the original project we opened was called my-app. The new standard for naming those selectors is to always have app in front and then whatever the name is. So you can see here the hero component we're going to create is going to be called app-heroes. So it will always be app- and then the name of your component. That's your selector. It's also a convention. You don't have to do it, but it's so that you can remember easier where you put your things. That's why most standards get created. So our TypeScript file is going to have a few things in it. So if you go over here, the heroes component class will look like this. The first thing we're doing is using something called an import. And we are importing things from the Angular libraries. Okay, so Angular is an entire framework and comes with a whole lot of helper libraries to help us to create our Angular applications. And one of those things is a component. The other we're going to be using is something called onInit. And all of the Angular libraries, or the official Angular libraries, always start with @Angular. You can see over there, it says @Angular. And this one is from the core part of the library. So this is the basic building blocks of Angular. That's why it's called core. And a component is a class. So like with object-oriented languages, like C# and Java, we have classes, we have interfaces, we have all of those things in TypeScript as well. And our hero component is just a class. So you can see it's called class heroes component. But that part at the top, so who here has done C#? A little bit, okay. Do you know data annotations in C#? Or attributes? So it's those square brackets that you put at the top of your methods in your C# code. this is the same kind of thing, but for JavaScript. Okay, so this part at the top here, it's like metadata, it's extra information telling Angular that this class is a component. It's not just a plain class, it's a component. Okay, and then inside it we define some extra information for the component. So that's this part over here. And then over here, these parts are relative to the component. So you don't have to put your HTML and CSS in the same folder like we did, but it's just easier to keep them in the same folder to keep things structured nicely. So that's why it says /, meaning in the current folder you can find heroes.component.html. The onInit method, you can see over here, ng onInit. ng is shorthand for Angular, so when you see ng, it means Angular. Okay, and this is a method that will execute when your component initializes. So when your page starts loading, this method will execute. Okay, and we're going to add some things into the onInit method in a few moments.
Can you just repeat what ng stands for?
Angular, yeah. So it's just another name for Angular, or shorthand for, so you don't have to type out Angular. Now we've added our component, but we also need to reference our component in the rest of the application. We need to tell the application that this component exists and that we want to use it. And to do that, we have to put it in our main module. Our main module is app.module.ts. So you can open up app.module.ts. And inside here, firstly, we need to tell it where to find the component. So the same way we were importing things from the Angular libraries, now we're going to import our own class. Okay, so we're going to go import, open curly brackets, close curly brackets. Inside here, we're going to say heroes component, because that's what we called our class. And then we're going to tell it where to get the heroes component. So if we look at our folder structure again, we're in this folder. We want to go into the hero folder and then reference the heroes component. So we're going to say from this current folder, dot, go into the hero folder and then go to hero.component. Then you saw at the end I added the semicolon. In JavaScript you don't have to put semicolons, but you shouldn't be that person who doesn't put semicolons. Okay, so a lot of the time, in order to get JavaScript smaller and to deploy it to production, you use something called a minifier. Okay, a minifier takes all of your JavaScript and puts it into one line, one very long line. It's just to make it smaller so that it doesn't have too much information. But what that means is if you don't have semicolons, it won't know where your statements end. And then everything will get mushed up and you won't actually be able to use it. So your compiler won't tell you that you need semicolons. It won't give you an error because you don't have semicolons, but if you don't have them, you might end up in trouble later on. And then once we've added our heroes component as an import, we also have to declare it. So over here in our declarations, after app component, we're going to add a comma, and then heroes component. But now, firstly, we don't have anything to display in our heroes component. And secondly, we haven't actually put our heroes component anywhere in order to display. Okay, so let's do that. Where do we want to display our heroes component? Well, we have a heading already, right? We have the big pretty heading that says Tutorial of Heroes. So underneath that, we can put our heroes component. Using our selector, we can reference the heroes component in the HTML. So in app component HTML, underneath our title, we're going to say app-heroes. And then we also need to close the tag. So what that means is add everything that the heroes component does underneath this title. Now we're going to go to hero component, the TypeScript file. And at the top of it, just over here, just above the constructor, we're going to define a property called hero. And we're going to call our hero. Sorry, I'm not very creative, so I'm going to copy this. Windstorm. In JavaScript classes, we have properties and methods by default are defined as public, which means that they can be accessed from anywhere else. You can define it as private. A private property, however, can only be accessed from within this class. It can't even be accessed in the HTML. So that's why it's very important that if you want to access things in your HTML or from another class, you have to make them public. Something that Patricia pointed out to me, these are called hero and this is called heroes. So I'm going to rename my files. You can right click on a file and say rename. And then, remember, we need to update it over here as well in our app module where we were importing it, because our file name is now different. So what I did is I renamed my 3 files to heroes.component, and in my app module where I'm importing heroes component, I renamed that file to heroes.component. And the last thing we need to do so that we can see something displayed on our page is in our heroes.component.html. All we're going to do is put double curly brackets and say hero. That's that property we created in the class. Once that's done, if you hit preview, when it loads, you can see now the name of my hero displays. So now what we're going to do is create the hero as a class. So the hero is going to be a whole object on its own, because a hero doesn't have only a name, right? Hero is made up of a lot more than just a name. No one's laughing at my lame jokes today. I need to up my game. Alright, so in our app folder over here, we're going to add a new file, and we're going to call it hero.ts. Okay? Not in a new folder or anything, in the app folder.
So we can adding here.
New file, yeah. In the app folder. So it will appear right here underneath your app.module.ts. You'll see it appear right there. And in TypeScript, we always start with export class. We put the export in the front so that we can import it in the other files. Okay, so we're telling this class that it's going to be able to be imported in other places. And we're going to call it hero. And then we're going to put curly braces. The curly braces say, in this section, I'm going to define what a hero is made up of. Our heroes are going to be a little bit lame, for now at least. They're going to be made up of an ID, which will be of type. So the colon means I want to define a type for the ID. And the type is number. And our hero will also have a name. And the type for the name will be string. Oh, I promise I can type. Now we have our hero class, and we want to use it. And where are we going to use it? Inside our hero component. Okay, so we're going to open our heroes.component.ts, and at the top here we're going to import it again. Alright, so we're going to import, in curly brackets we specify the class we are importing. Now remember, this part is case sensitive, so however you spelt this name over here, alright, that's what you type in here. So it's going to, mine is with a capital H. And then where I'm importing it from. Now, I'm inside the hero folder, but my hero class is one folder up. So I need to go up one folder. I do that by putting 2 dots and then a / and then just saying hero. So this is the name of the class, this is the name of the file. Okay, and all of it is case sensitive. Now, our hero that we put over here, the windstorm hero, we're going to make it not just a string, not just a name. We're going to make it the class. Okay, so we can take this line and delete it for now. And we're going to say hero of type capital H hero. So small h hero of type capital H hero is going to be equal to an object. And inside this object, we're going to say what, remember we had an ID and a name, so we need to set those things. So our ID for now will be 0, because we're not keeping track of IDs for now. And then inside the object, we'll separate the properties with commas. And inside here, we also need a name, and it will be windstorm. Now at this point, if you go to your preview,
Check your type of Windows Store.
Windows Storm. If you go to your preview at this point, which I can't seem to go to anymore. I'm just going to open it in a new window. I've just opened my preview in a new window. But it will look weird. And don't worry if it does. Okay. But that's because we've now made a hero which is an object, but we're still displaying just a string. Alright. So we're trying to display the name, but we have a whole object and it doesn't know where the name is. So we need to make some more changes in our HTML. This is going to load eventually, I hope. Now we're going to open heroes component.html. And here we're going to delete this hero that we have. And we're going to add some other text. I just want to make sure what text we're adding. Okay. So inside an H2, we're going to add double curly brackets, hero dot name. Now, because our hero is now an object, we can access its properties by using the dots. And then behind the curly brackets, so not still inside the curly brackets, we're going to say details. Because we wanted to display Windstorm's details. And then we need to close our H2 tag. And then we're going to add a paragraph with ID, and then in curly brackets say hero.id. And same thing for name. And if we had other properties on our hero, this is where we'd add them. But this is all the details we have of our hero so far. And now your preview should be displaying the ID and name that we created. So you should see something like this. But there's something in Angular called the pipe operator. The pipe operator is the actual pipe on your keyboard. It's that long line. And what it does is it can add filters onto your text. So it can make either filter your text, it can add things to your text, or in our case what we're going to use it for is to kind of style our text. So what we're going to do is at the end here, inside the curly brackets of the hero name, we're going to put in a pipe, and then we need to specify the name of the pipe we'll be using. We're going to be using something called uppercase. And if I could spell right, it wouldn't give me errors. Okay. And what all that will do is it will take the name of your hero and put it in uppercase letters. Okay. There's a lot of built-in pipes in Angular, and they can help with a lot of things. I think this is the only one we're going to be using today, but you can have a look at them. And so this this tutorial that we're using is actually the Angular official tutorial. And most of the information, whenever you're struggling with something on Angular, you can usually find it on their own website. So it's not like other frameworks where you have to search through tons and tons of Stack Overflow posts before you can figure something out. Angular is pretty good with their documentation. So a lot of the time, if you're struggling with something, you can find the solution on their website. So now we're going to do some editing. One of the biggest reasons that Angular 2 came about was because of the data binding in Angular 1. The way that data binding was done in Angular 1 made Angular 1 quite slow. So when it got to very big applications, that applications would slow down a lot if you had a lot of forms that needed to be filled in or events that needed to occur on when you click buttons. So they improved the data binding a lot in Angular 2 and onwards. And we're going to be using something called two-way data binding. Okay, so who knows what data binding is? No one? Okay, so data binding is what we've been doing with those curly braces. We've been binding the data that we set up from our TypeScript side to our HTML. That's what data binding is. So we're pushing the data from the TypeScript to the HTML. That's how we could display ID 0 and name Windstorm. Okay. But now, sometimes you need to get feedback. So you need to have the HTML or a user typing on your form receive the information that they type. So you need to have it the other way around. You need the HTML to be able to send data to the TypeScript. And two-way data binding is binding that goes both ways. So it goes from TypeScript to HTML and from HTML to TypeScript. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now, so that we can add a text box on the form, and that text box will display the name of our hero, which is currently Windstorm. But when we change the name, we'll see the name being updated in that title. So let's take this part out here, where we're displaying the name, and add a div. Inside this div, we're going to put something called a label. Close the label. And first we're going to type the actual label, so to prompt people what to fill in the box. So we're going to say name, colon. So this is just the text that's going to get displayed. So it will display name. And then next to name, we want to put a text box. A text box, for those of you who were here last week, you'll remember, is created like that. And it will be of type text. Okay? One other thing we're going to add to our text box is a placeholder. So you've probably seen placeholders a lot. A lot of websites use placeholders. What a placeholder is you know when you have a text box on a website and there's kind of like a lighter colored text that prompts you what to type in there, but as soon as you click in the text box and start typing, that text disappears. That's what a placeholder is. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to do is actually do the binding. Now, to do the two-way data binding, we need to use some special characters in Angular. So binding from HTML to CSS is done with round brackets. Binding from TypeScript back to the HTML is done with square brackets. So we have square brackets and round brackets. Okay, and inside here, we're going to use a keyword from Angular called ng-model. ng-model is the Angular model, and what it's saying is the value of this text box is going to be what I'm going to specify next. Okay, and it's bound in both directions. So from TypeScript to HTML, from HTML to TypeScript, because of the brackets. So after our ng-model, with an equals and inverted commas, we say which property of the hero we're binding this to. And that is hero.name. And then lastly, we close our input tag. Some of you will now be seeing the error can't bind to ng-model because it's not a property of input. This is because editing forms in Angular is not part, we haven't told Angular yet that we're going to be using it. So those of you who are still using the initial statblitz thing we created, you probably won't have this error because it had the forms module imported. Remember, we were talking about the imports, the browser module. So a module is a part of Angular that we need to use. So we need to, in our app module.ts, at the top here, we need to import that forms module. So we're going to import forms module from Angular forms. At Angular, because it's an official Angular module, and it's inside the forms section. And then once we've added it to the import, we also need to, as an import at the top, we also needed to add it to the actual imports. There. Sometimes it takes a little while for the error to go away. Yeah. So now we have our little text box. And this is the part of the magical two-way data binding. Can you see what's happening in the title? I just want to show you this part and then I'm going to walk around and help people. Can you see what's happening in the title over there? That's because it's bound in both directions. So it's automatically updating the entire object so that it knows what to do. Okay, so we're going to try to do this one last bit. The tutorial still goes on to up to number 8, but it's going to get quite complicated and lunch is at 1, so we probably won't get there. But I encourage you to, when you get home, carry on with the tutorial and finish it, because it really does give you a really nice grounding for how Angular works. Even though it's a really simple little application, and it's not something you would probably use in the real world, this kind of application, but it gives you the basics of what Angular is about. So when you have to create a real world Angular application, you'll have that knowledge. Cool. So the next part we're going to do is show a list of heroes. So our list of heroes is going to be displayed nicely for us, and then when we click on a hero, we're going to see the details appear underneath. Okay, we're just gonna make a mock list of heroes for now. This is the kind of data you would normally get out of a database or something like that. But for now, we're just gonna create a list of heroes. So in our app folder, remember in the app folder, not the hero folder, we're going to add a new file and call it, just want to check what it was supposed to be called, mockheroes.ts. mock-heroes.ts. And in mock heroes, we're just going to copy the heroes from the tutorial, so we don't have to write them out. And while you're copying that, I'm just going to explain what we're doing here. So we're firstly importing the hero class from our hero folder, from our hero file, and then we're creating an array. So notice this part over here. You can almost reach it. Okay, so hero and then open and close square bracket. This means that we want to create a hero array or multiple heroes. And then over here we open that hero array and we add objects to it. So the same way we were creating Windstorm earlier, we're now adding 10 of them. 3, 6, 9, 10 of them. Okay. Now, one more thing to note about JavaScript. JavaScript has 3 ways of defining variables or properties or variables or fields. One is by the keyword var, V-A-R. One is with the keyword let, and one is with the keyword const. Okay, so var is the original way. It's been around since JavaScript started. It used to be the only way, but var has a few problems. Things like you can overwrite a variable with the same name when you're using var, if you happen to declare something with the same name. So that's why they came up with let and const. Now, the difference between let and const is const comes from the word constant, and it means that it can only be defined once. So by defining this heroes array as a const, it means we can't somewhere else in our code accidentally overwrite what the heroes array contains. It will give us an error. It will tell us it's not allowed. If this was a let, we could overwrite it and change it. Okay, so that's the difference between...
The content of the variable can't be overwritten.
Yeah, so this array of stuff can't be replaced with new things because it's a constant. That's why they named it constant, right? Okay. No, constant. It's constant. It's never changing. Okay. Now we're going to go back to our heroes component. And in our heroes component, where we import hero at the top, we're also going to import our mock heroes. Once we've imported our heroes at the top, over here, just above where we define our hero, we're going to define another property called heroes. And just set it to equal to heroes. Now, we've seen components in Angular. Now we're going to see something called a directive. A directive in Angular is like a component, but it doesn't have an HTML and CSS template. Okay, so it just does something. Using TypeScript, it does something, but it doesn't have its own HTML and CSS. And the directive we're going to use is called the ng-for directive. So we all know for loops, right? A for loop that iterates through a number of things. And that's what ng-for does. So we have our array of heroes, and we're going to go through each of the heroes. So over here above our hero details, so you can skip a few lines there and above here. We're firstly going to add an h2 and call it my heroes. And then don't forget to close your h2 tag. And then we're going to add an unordered list, UL. Okay? Open and close, and inside it, we're going to add some list items. Okay. And inside the angle brackets of the list item, we're going to use that ng-for. Now, the way you tell Angular you're using one of its built-in directives is with a star. Star, and then ng, capital F, for. Equals, inverted commas. Now inside the inverted commas, we're going to tell it what we're going to iterate over in our for loop. So we're going to use let hero of heroes. So heroes is the thing we defined in our TypeScript. And here we're saying we're going to have a new hero, and it's going to go through each of the heroes in our array with the ng-for. Now inside the li, we can put double curly braces, hero.name. And if we hit the preview, we can see our heroes being displayed. Now let's just add a few classes here so that it makes it look pretty. So on our UL, we're going to put a space, class equals to heroes. Okay? And inside our li, we're going to, let me just check what the class was. I'm skipping ahead a bit. Oops. Okay, sorry. Inside our li, I'm going to split it onto 3 different lines. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter there, enter there. In front of hero.name, I'm going to say span class equals to badge, and then I'm going to close the span. And inside the open and close span tags, I'm going to add double curly braces and say hero.id. So now we have a list of our heroes. Okay. Now the next thing we want to change is that when we click on one of the heroes in our list, we want it to replace this hero at the bottom here. Okay, so what we want to do is we have our list over here, and when we click on Mr. Nice, at the bottom here we should see Mr. Nice details. So now we're going to use one-way data binding, and we're going to bind to the click event. Okay, so we want to, when we click on the list item, something to happen on the TypeScript side. So which brackets are we going to use? Which one goes from HTML to TypeScript? Round brackets. That's it. Round brackets. And in HTML, we have an event called click. So that means that we're listening for the user to click. We're waiting for them to click. So in curly brackets, we can put click, not curly round brackets. Those ones. Now we need to tell it what's going to happen when we click. What's going to happen when we click? We want to do something. What do we want to do? We want to select hero. And we're going to put open and close brackets at the end because we're saying that select hero is going to be a function. So it's going to be some sort of method that executes when we click. Now we have this function here, but it's complaining, right? So we need to actually create that as a method in our TypeScript. So in our TypeScript, at the bottom, but above this curly bracket, so just underneath this ng on init, we're going to create the select hero method. So the open and close brackets say that this is a method, a function. It's going to do something. But now, when the user clicks on a hero, we need to tell the TypeScript which hero they actually clicked on. And on the HTML side, we know this. So in our HTML, we have the hero because each item is a hero, right? Each list item in our list is a hero. And it's called hero because that's what we're defining it as. So we can just say hero over here. So again, some of you got confused earlier when mine went on to a new line. It's because I'm zoomed in quite a lot. So keep yours on one line if you can. All right. So inside the brackets of select hero, we're going to put the hero. And then in our TypeScript, we're going to tell it to expect to get a hero when something gets clicked. So we're going to say hero of type hero. We are expecting a hero, nothing else. So if you pass us something else, this is going to break. Okay. So now we're using the word hero a lot everywhere. So I'm going to get rid of this old hero that we defined originally. Just delete it. Okay. The heroes are still there. The array of heroes is still there. But we're just deleting that windstorm hero we created originally. And over here, I'm going to create a new variable. And I'm going to call it selected hero. Okay. So selected hero, the hero that was clicked on. And originally, that's going to be nothing. So we're just going to say it's of type hero, but it won't have anything set to it. And now, when our user has clicked on one of the heroes in our list, we want to set this hero that they've clicked on to be our selected hero. So we're going to use a JavaScript thing that takes very, very many years to understand. But I'm going to try to explain it as simply as possible. It's called this. So the reason it's so difficult to explain is because you tend to use the word this a lot when you're explaining this. So what this is, you see what I mean? This means this class. Okay, so that's the simplest way you can look at it. This means this class. So we're in the heroes component class. So it would actually be, in fact, be the same as typing out heroes component dot. Okay. But when we type this, we now have access to all of the properties of the class. So we can say this dot selected hero equals to the hero that the user clicked on. And we have our selected hero. But now, if you open your preview, you'll see it's broken. Oh no, why is it broken? Well, it's broken because our HTML is still looking for that hero that we deleted over here. And it doesn't know what to do. There's something missing, so it just breaks. It doesn't break gracefully. This is one of the other problems with JavaScript. A lot of the time it doesn't break gracefully. It doesn't tell you what the exact error is. So you have to kind of figure it out. But in order to fix this, what we're going to do is change this hero over here to be the selected hero. So in the section underneath our list, where we have the details of our hero, we're going to change this to selected hero. This one. And this one. Okay. So does this work now? The ID, the name, wherever you're referencing .name or .id in that other section, not the list section. So leave the list section as it was. In the bottom section, the one we did earlier, the detail section, change that to selected hero.
So it's only
It's
two
still,
places where you change it?
yeah, three. In the header, in the ID, and in the input. But it still doesn't work. That's okay. Don't worry. I know it still doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Can anyone guess why it doesn't work? Hmm? We haven't selected a hero. Exactly. But what happens the first time when you come to the page and you haven't selected a hero? We don't want to just display the first hero. That's not how it should work. This is where we're going to use another Angular directive. The other Angular directive we're going to use is called ngIf. So it's a if statement. So we're going to check if this thing exists, show it. If it doesn't, don't. So we're going to wrap this whole section over here inside a div. So we're going to open the div above the H2, and we're going to close it right at the bottom. And inside the angle brackets of the div, we're going to say star ng if, and all we have to do is say selected hero. Why? Because JavaScript has this thing called truthy and falsy. So a value can be truthy or falsy. And what that's actually doing, that if, is it's checking, is selected hero defined? But we don't have to write that out in code. It can do it just by us saying selected hero. And it knows straight away, it returns a Boolean value. If there's something behind selected hero, if selected hero has been assigned to something, it will be true. If it hasn't, it will be false. So let's see if our code works. There we have our list of heroes, and at the bottom, there's nothing. But when I click, details appear. If I click somewhere else, okay. So, there. At the bottom in the final code review, there's a heroes.component.css. Copy that into your heroes.component.css. Okay, so we haven't done any CSS for this section yet. Just copy that in here so that it will display your heroes nicely like this. Cool. So let's get everyone to this point, and then we're gonna do some more questions and prizes and then eat some nice food.